The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change.
12 years later.
What's up guys, my name's Rosh and welcome to my channel. Today's video is a little different from my previous content. I'll be debunking another skeptic soon, so stay tuned for that. But today I'll be addressing a different kind of pseudoscience. Climate doomism, and how sensationalist reporting feeds into it and undermines climate science. In particular, we'll be looking at how the findings of a recent climate change study were misrepresented by a media outlet, and how this plays into the hands of those who wish to attack the credibility of science. Watch on to find out more. Climate doomism is a term used to describe an extreme kind of pessimism about climate change, which is totally detached from reality. In many ways, climate doomers fall at the opposite end of the pseudoscience spectrum from your typical so-called climate skeptics. They routinely fixate on worst-case climate change scenarios and assert that climate change will have an apocalyptic effect on the planet. They claim that civilizational collapse is imminent or even inevitable, or that life on Earth may be wiped out entirely. Needless to say, these doomsday predictions are not scientifically credible and are widely dismissed by the scientific community. But unfortunately, they serve as fodder for those who would like to believe that climate change is either non-existent or no serious threat to humanity. Now, I want to make it clear that I am not trying to blame the rise of science denial and so-called climate skepticism on these doomers, but clearly they have contributed to the erosion of informed climate change discourse. And a significant driver of this doomism is sloppy scientific reporting. And that brings me on to why I decided to make this video now. While editing my last video, a new breakthrough study on climate sensitivity was published, and since it was directly relevant, I added a very brief summary of its findings to that video. Essentially, the study by Sherwood et al. Looked at multiple lines of evidence to better constrain the likely range for climate sensitivity. If you haven't seen the video, climate sensitivity refers to the amount of warming we could expect from a doubling of CO2. This is important to understand because it determines how much carbon we can release before we reach a given threshold of warming. Prior to this study's release, the estimated range for climate sensitivity had remained more or less unchanged for decades, with a range of between 1.5 and 4.5 degrees, and a best estimate of around 3 degrees. Sherwood et al. Narrows that range to between 2.6 and 4.1 degrees, with estimates below 2.3 and above 4.5 being extremely unlikely. They have therefore reduced the uncertainty and effectively ruled out estimates at the lower end of the previous range. But unfortunately, within days of being published, Bloomberg Quicktake News released this video reporting on the study. As you can see, they correctly stated that this study has ruled out the most optimistic estimate for climate sensitivity. But have a look at what they say next. The scientists concluded that catastrophic warming is almost inevitable. No, they didn't. Not even close. The phrase catastrophic warming doesn't appear once in the 166-page report, and nothing it says could be construed as implying that a worst-case catastrophic warming scenario is in any way inevitable, or even likely. Now, maybe you think this kind of thing doesn't matter, but as long as it inspires effective climate action, then it's benign, a necessary evil. But incorrectly implying that catastrophic warming is almost inevitable is hugely problematic for a number of reasons. For some, it will breed apathy, a sense that if it's almost inevitable, then why bother doing anything? For others, it will instill grief, panic, or despair, none of which is a productive state of mind from which to take effective action. And of course, for many, it will elicit eye-rolling and derision. And unfortunately, much of that derision will be directed at the scientists rather than the journalists who actually deserve it. In other words, this kind of reporting actively undermines the credibility of scientists and the perception of scientific integrity among the public, and that fuels science denial. You see, there's a reason why so much of skeptical discourse is driven by sentiments like these.
At first it was global cooling, the ice age is coming. Then it was global warming, we're melting. Then it was climate disruption. Then, well, if it gets warm or cold, we'll just call it climate change and blame people. Now, every failed prediction, one after another.
As Mr. Hannity has just demonstrated, many people genuinely believe that imminent global cooling was once a consensus view among climate scientists. It wasn't, by the way. And they believe that these scientists have routinely made failed predictions of apocalypse and catastrophe. And in fairness to Hannity and those like him, this is often the impression we get from the way climate science is presented to us by the media. It's a narrative which is continuously exploited by skeptical media to further undermine scientific credibility. This article, for example, is what Mr. Hannity was reporting on just there. It claims to list 50 years of apparently failed doomsday predictions. But if you read it, it soon becomes clear that these predictions are nearly all from news reports rather than peer-reviewed literature. And they're full of sensationalist headlines or cherry-picked quotes which make some kind of apocalyptic prediction for the future. But none of the predictions on this list have ever had the backing of the broad body of scientific literature. If they have any scientific basis at all, and many don't, it is either misrepresented or lacking appropriate context. Because in many cases, these articles are reporting on a single contested hypothesis rather than a widely agreed upon scientific conclusion. These predictions are an important part of the scientific method, and we would expect many to be wrong. But by implying that they are anything more than hypotheses, these reporters are doing a disservice to science. To be fair, some of the articles on this list actually do clarify this. Take this article in The Guardian, for example. Its headline boldly suggested that the Arctic would be ice-free within 2 years. But the article itself is more nuanced and reveals that the claim made by Professor Peter Wadhams actually referred to summer sea ice, not all ice, and that these predictions were contested by numerous other researchers. To be clear, real scientific predictions are nuanced, expressed in terms of probability, and rarely propose anything that could be considered apocalyptic. And yet, because of dodgy media coverage, a misunderstanding of the scientific process, and apparently an inability to read beyond the headline, many people seem to believe that apocalyptic predictions are being confidently made by the scientific community on a frequent basis. And it's not just media outlets that feed into this. Prominent politicians have also contributed to this problematic perception.
If Greenland broke up and melted, or if half of Greenland and half of West Antarctica broke up and melted, this is what would happen to the sea level in Florida.
The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change.
No, it won't, and making that claim is unhelpful. The actual scientific prediction that AOC has bastardized here, which for the record is widely agreed upon, is that unless global emissions decrease 45% from 2010 levels by 2030, which was 12 years away when AOC said this, we are likely to exceed 1.5 degrees of warming above the pre-industrial baseline this century. And Al Gore's claim that Florida would be underwater if Greenland melted, while technically true, fails to clarify that this would take centuries, if not millennia, to occur. The broadly agreed upon scientific prediction, on the other hand, is between 1 and 4 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. Nowhere near as dramatic as the 20-odd feet Gore implied, but still majorly problematic for both coastal communities and infrastructure. The Sherwood et al. Study should inspire us to act. Provides a greater confidence in the relationship between our emissions and future warming, a confidence which can better inform policy. Indeed, Zeke Housefather, one of the scientists behind the study, responded to Bloomberg's misleading video on Twitter, saying, "By narrowing the range of likely future climate sensitivity, our emission choices have more control on how much the Earth will warm, not less." And to be fair to science reporters, the majority do tend to get it right. But it only takes 1 or 2 misleading or exaggerated stories to pollute the entire discourse around climate science. The reality is that climate change is a very real threat to humanity, but not apocalyptically so. Catastrophic, civilization-ending climate change is possible, but incredibly unlikely. And if we take sensible policy decisions informed by scientific research, we'll not only avoid it completely, but minimise many of the negative effects of less than catastrophic warming too. So that's just some food for thought for you guys. This video wasn't intended as a full-on fact check of doomist claims, but rather a reflection on the poor dialogue that still hounds climate science in the media. If you'd like me to look at climate doomism in more detail, then let me know in the comments. And if you want to see more of my content, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and smash that bell icon. I'll be debunking another skeptic soon, so stay tuned for that. Until next time, goodbye.